The Wyoming sky burned red as blood that evening, the kind of sunset that promised either blessing or judgment. Sarah Blackfeather stood at the edge of Powder River, her bare feet sinking into cold mud that had swallowed her husband 6 weeks ago. The water moved slow and dark, carrying secrets it would never tell. Emma stood beside her mother, 7 years old and silent as stone. The child had not spoken since that morning in early autumn when she came running home alone, her father's hat still floating where the current had taken him. Sarah knelt down, her black morning dress pooling in the dirt. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the surface of the water. It was ice cold. Thomas had been a strong swimmer. He knew this river like he knew the lines of her face. He would not have drowned, not unless someone made sure he did. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. 6 weeks ago, she had been making breakfast, the smell of cornmeal and bacon filling their small wooden home. Thomas had kissed her forehead, rough hands gentle on her shoulders. He had told her he would take Emma to find 3 cows that had wandered toward the river. He would be back before the coffee went cold. He never came back. Sarah's hand moved to the bone bracelet on her wrist, the one Thomas had braided for her their first winter together. It was the last thing that still carried his warmth. She closed her eyes and saw him the way he had been that morning. Strong, certain, alive. When she opened them, Emma was staring at the water with eyes too old for a child. Sarah knew that look. It was the look of someone who had seen something they could never unsee. She pulled her daughter close, feeling the small body trembling against her own. "Do you remember anything about that day, little one? Anything at all?" Emma shook her head, but her eyes told a different story. They said, "I remember everything, and I will never speak of it." Sarah pressed her lips to the top of Emma's head and whispered a promise into her daughter's black hair. "I will find out what happened. I swear it on your father's grave." But Thomas did not have a grave. His body had been found 3 miles downstream, 2 days after he vanished. The water had done its work, and Sheriff Quinn had been quick to call it an accident. Too quick. Sarah stood, brushing mud from her dress. As she did, something caught the fading light. There, half buried in the riverbank mud, was a button, not rusted iron or cheap tin, but polished brass with letters stamped into its face. She bent down and picked it up, turning it over in her palm. The letters were clear even in the dying light. N.W. Ranch. Nathaniel Wolf Ranch. Sarah's blood went cold. She slipped the button into her pocket and took Emma's hand. They walked back toward their home as darkness fell across Hart Ridge like a shroud. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the brass button in front of her, gleaming in the lamplight like an accusation. The house felt too large without Thomas. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls sounded like footsteps, like someone watching. She had been alone for 6 weeks now, 6 weeks of waking to an empty bed, 6 weeks of doing the work of 2 people, 6 weeks of watching her daughter retreat into silence, day by day, word by word, until there was nothing left but empty eyes and trembling hands. And in those 6 weeks, the trouble had started. At first, it had been small things, easy to dismiss. The fence on the north pasture had been cut clean through. Mighty cows had wandered onto Wolf's land. Sarah had found them 3 days later, thin and frightened. She had thought it was coyotes, maybe wolves. But wolves did not use wire cutters. Then the well, sweet water that had never failed them, suddenly tasting bitter and wrong. Sarah had lowered the bucket and pulled up something that made her stomach turn. A small cloth sack tied with twine. Inside was white powder that burned her nose when she sniffed it. Arsenic. She had dumped every bucket, scrubbed the well with lye soap, and prayed the poison had not already done its work. For 3 days, she had carried water from the creek 2 miles away, her back screaming, her hands raw with blisters, and then the footprints. Night after night, she would hear them. The soft crunch of boots on dry grass, the sound of someone walking slow circles around the house, patient as a wolf waiting for the herd to sleep. She would stand in the darkness with Thomas's shotgun, watching the windows, waiting for a face to appear. But no one ever came to the door. They just walked and waited and let her know they were there. Each morning she would find the tracks, size 11 boots with a groove near the heel, the kind worn by ranch hands who worked with cattle. Not farmers, not drifters, professional men, men who got paid to do a job. Sarah looked down at the button again. She knew what it meant. Knew what all of it meant. Someone wanted her off this land. Someone powerful enough to poison her well and walk around her house at night without fear of the law. Someone like Nathaniel Wolfe. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows that danced like demons on the walls. Sarah thought about Emma upstairs, finally asleep after hours of silent tears. She thought about the 160 acres that Thomas had claimed under the Homestead Act 5 years ago, the land he had worked every day, sunrise to sunset, until it became more than dirt and grass. It became home, and someone wanted to take it. Sarah's hands curled into fists. She was Apache. Her people had been driven from their lands more times than history could count. She had watched her own mother forced onto a reservation, had seen the light die in her father's eyes when he realized the white man's promises were made of smoke and lies. But Thomas had been different. He had believed in the law, believed that if you followed the rules, filed the papers, worked the land for 5 years, it would be yours. Protected, safe. He had been wrong. The next morning came cold and clear. Sarah woke to find frost on the windows and her breath misting in the air. She dressed quickly, pulling on her heavy wool dress and the coat Thomas had bought her last winter. It was too big, made for his shoulders, but it was warm. She checked on Emma. The child was awake, sitting up in bed, holding the rag doll Thomas had made her. She was staring at nothing, seeing everything, everything. "Stay with Mrs. Patterson today," Sarah said softly. "I have to go into town." Emma's eyes flickered to her mother's face, and for just a moment, there was fear there, real and raw. "I will come back," Sarah promised. "I always come back." But as she saddled her old mare and prepared to ride to Sheridan, she wondered if that promise was one she could keep. Because what she was about to do was dangerous, maybe foolish. She was going to find the one man Thomas had told her to seek if trouble ever came. She was going to find Ethan Cross. The ride to Sheridan took 2 hours. The town sat in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to grow out of the prairie like weeds. It was a place where cattle barons held more power than judges, and money spoke louder than law. Sarah kept her head down as she rode through the main street. She could feel eyes on her. Whispers followed her like flies. She was used to it. A half-breed Apache widow was not welcome in places like this. She was tolerated. Barely. She tied her mare outside the land office and went inside. The clerk was a thin man with spectacles that magnified his eyes until he looked like some kind of insect. He glanced up at her, and his expression said everything she needed to know. She was a problem he did not want to deal with. "I need to transfer land ownership," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady, "from my husband's name to mine." The clerk sighed and pulled out a ledger thick as a Bible. "Name of deceased?" "Thomas Blackfeather." The clerk wrote it down with a pen that scratched like claws. "You got a death certificate?" "Sheriff Quinn gave me one." "That's one document. You need 3 witnesses to confirm death by accident. If you can't prove it was an accident, the land reverts to government possession for auction." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. 3 witnesses? There was no one else there when he died. The clerk looked at her over his spectacles. "Then you got 60 days to find proof, Mrs. Blackfeather. Otherwise, come November 15th, that land goes up for sale." "But the law says a widow inherits." "The law says a widow inherits if the death is accidental. If there's any question of suicide or criminal activity, the land is forfeit." He closed the ledger with a sound like a coffin lid. 60 days, ma'am, not a day more." Sarah walked out into the cold October air, feeling like she had been kicked in the chest. 60 days, 2 months to prove Thomas had died by accident, when she knew in her bones it had been murder. And the only witness was a 7-year-old girl who could no longer speak. She stood on the wooden sidewalk watching the people of Sheridan go about their business. Men in suits and women in clean dresses, all of them pretending not to see her. To them, she was invisible, a ghost in mourning black. But she was not going to disappear. Not while Emma still needed her. Not while Thomas's killer walked free. Sarah mounted her horse and turned toward the edge of town, where the road became nothing more than a dirt path leading into the hills. She remembered what Thomas had told her. The cabin was 8 miles out, hidden in the pine forest where the fog never quite lifted. "If you ever need help," he had said, "find Ethan Cross. He is the only man in Sheridan that even Wolf fears." The afternoon sun was already sinking when Sarah finally found the cabin. It sat in a clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines, small and plain, with smoke rising thin and gray from a stone chimney. There was no fence, no garden, no sign that anyone cared about making the place welcoming. Just a wooden gun rack outside the door, holding 3 Winchester rifles in perfect condition. Sarah dismounted and tied her horse to a tree. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from fear. What if Thomas had been wrong? What if this Ethan Cross was just another man who would look at her and see nothing worth helping? She walked to the door and knocked. For a long moment there was nothing. Then she heard footsteps inside, slow and deliberate. A bolt slid back. The door opened 4 inches, and a pair of gray eyes looked out at her. Eyes like winter ice. Eyes that had seen too much. "I don't take visitors," the man said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. Sarah swallowed hard. "I am not here to visit. I am here because I need help." The eyes studied her face, taking in the morning dress, the exhaustion carved into her features. "Your husband died. He was murdered. Go to the sheriff. The sheriff is afraid of the man who killed him." The door stayed open only 4 inches. "Then leave town." "I have a daughter. She is 7 years old. She watched her father die and now she cannot speak. If I leave, the men who killed my husband will take everything he worked for. They will win." The man behind the door said nothing, but he did not close it either. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the cloth bag she had brought. She held it up so he could see. "This is arsenic. Someone put it in my well. This is a piece of rope. Someone used it to tie a live rattlesnake and place it where I would reach for hay. And this is a button from Nathaniel Wolf's ranch." She met those cold gray eyes. "I am not asking you to fight my battles. I am asking you to help me find the truth. Because if I die, my daughter has no one." The door opened wider. Ethan Cross stepped into the light and Sarah saw him fully for the first time. He was tall, lean like a wolf in winter, with graying hair and a face that had been carved by hard years and harder choices. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt and canvas pants, but he moved like a man who had spent his life one step ahead of violence. He looked at the items in Sarah's hands. Then he looked at her. "Come inside," he said. The cabin was as spare as a monk's cell. 1 table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, a wood stove. No photographs, no decorations, nothing that spoke of a life beyond survival. Sarah laid the evidence on the table. Ethan picked up each item, examining it with the careful attention of a man who knew how to read a crime scene. He sniffed the arsenic, bone meal and arsenic, the kind used to kill wolves on large ranches. Wolf uses it by the pound. He studied the rope. Twisted leather, machine-made, not something a farmer would have. He turned the brass button over in his palm. Wolf hands these out to his top men, foremen and enforcers. Then he looked at Sarah. "Your husband did not drown by accident." "I know." "Wolf wants your land." "I know that too." Ethan set the button down and leaned back in his chair. For the first time, something that might have been emotion crossed his face. "Why would Thomas tell you to come to me? He said you were the only man Wolf feared. He said 5 years ago, you were the best U.S. Marshal in Wyoming. And he said if anyone could help me, it would be you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I stopped being a marshal 5 years ago." "Why?" He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening forest. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was not there when my family needed me. Because while I was chasing outlaws across the territory, someone came to my home. Someone killed my wife, killed my 4-year-old son. And when I finally came back, all I found were bodies and blood." Sarah felt the words like a blow. "I am sorry." Being sorry does not bring them back. He turned to face her. "That is why I live out here. That is why I do not wear a badge anymore. Because I failed the people who mattered most. Then help me not fail my daughter." Ethan looked at her for a long time. In his eyes, Sarah saw the same things she saw every time she looked in a mirror. Grief, guilt, and the desperate need to make something right in a world that was so terribly wrong. "I will look at your land," he finally said. "I will see what evidence there is. But I cannot promise I can stop Wolf. He has 30 men and half the county in his pocket. I am not asking you to stop him. I am asking you to help me find the truth." Ethan picked up his coat from a peg by the door. "Then we ride, now, before the light is gone." They rode in silence, Sarah leading the way back to Hart Ridge. The sun was setting behind them, turning the prairie gold and crimson, painting long shadows across the grass. Sarah glanced at Ethan riding beside her. He sat his horse like a man born to the saddle, eyes constantly moving, reading the land the way some men read books. "How did Thomas know you?" she asked. "I arrested a man who tried to steal his cattle 3 years ago. Your husband testified at the trial. He was brave. Most men would have kept quiet rather than make an enemy. Thomas believed in doing what was right, and it got him killed." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to defend her husband's memory, but she could not, because Ethan was right. Thomas had believed in justice, and justice had failed him. When they reached Hart Ridge, the ranch looked peaceful in the dying light. The house Thomas had built with his own hands, the barn where their horses slept, the fence line stretching toward the horizon. Emma was there, sitting on the porch with Mrs. Patterson. When she saw her mother, she stood and ran down the steps. But when she saw the stranger, she froze. Sarah dismounted quickly. "It is all right, little one. This is Mr. Cross. He is here to help." Emma looked at Ethan with wide, frightened eyes, but she did not run. She just stood there, small and silent, clutching her rag doll like it was the only solid thing in the world. Ethan knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the child's eye level. He did not smile, did not try to be friendly. He just looked at her with those winter gray eyes and spoke in a voice softer than Sarah had heard yet. "Your father was a good man. I'm sorry he is gone." Emma's lower lip trembled, but she did not cry. She just stared at this stranger who spoke her father's name with respect. Ethan stood and turned to Sarah. "Show me where he died." They walked to the river as the last light drained from the sky. Sarah showed Ethan the place where Thomas's hat had been found, the spot where his body had washed up 2 days later, the rock where she had found the brass button. Ethan knelt in the mud, studying the ground with the focused intensity of a hunter. He moved slowly along the bank, reading signs that Sarah could not see. "There were 2 people here," he finally said. "One larger than the other. They struggled. Here." He pointed to disturbed earth near a flat rock. "Someone fell, or was pushed, and here," he touched a dark stain on the stone. "Blood. Old blood." Sarah felt her throat tighten. So he did not drown. He was hit first, hard enough to crack his skull. Then he was pushed into the water. Ethan stood, brushing mud from his hands. This was not an accident. This was murder. "Can you prove it?" "Maybe, if we can find the weapon, if we can find witnesses, if we can prove Wolf ordered it." He looked at her. "But proof means nothing if the law does not care. And in Sheridan, the law belongs to whoever has the most money." "Then what do we do?" Ethan gazed out at the darkening river. "We make Wolf careless. We make him think he has already won. And then we catch him when he comes to claim his prize." "How?" "By giving him what he wants, or making him think we are." They walked back to the house as full dark fell over Hart Ridge. Mrs. Patterson had gone home, leaving a pot of stew on the stove and Emma sitting at the kitchen table, drawing on old newspaper with a piece of charcoal. Sarah lit the lamps while Ethan stood by the door, looking out at the night. There was something about him, she realized. A stillness that came from years of waiting, watching, hunting. He was a man who had learned patience the hard way. "You can stay in the barn tonight," Sarah said. "There is hay and blankets. I will stay outside. If Wolf's men come, I want to see them first. They come every night walking circles, letting me know they are watching. Then tonight they will find someone watching back." Ethan turned to look at Emma, still drawing in the lamplight. "Your daughter, she saw what happened?" Sarah nodded. "She has not spoken since." "Trauma does that. The mind protects itself by shutting down." He paused. "But she remembers. Somewhere inside, she remembers everything. Will she ever speak again?" "That depends on whether she feels safe enough to remember." He looked at Sarah. Children are smarter than we give them credit for. She knows that speaking the truth put her father in danger. She knows that silence might keep her mother alive. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. She blinked them away. I just want her to be a child again. Then we make this place safe for both of you. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the prairie, wind through grass, the distant cry of a coyote, and somewhere out there in the darkness, Ethan Cross, watching over her land like a ghost guarding a grave. She thought about Thomas, about the way he used to hold her when storms came, about his laugh when Emma did something clever, about his hands, rough and strong, building this life from nothing. And she thought about the men who had taken him from her. Sleep finally came, but it was restless and full of dreams. Dreams of water closing over Thomas's head. Dreams of Emma running through darkness, chased by shadows. Dreams of brass buttons and poisoned wells and footsteps that never stopped circling. She woke to the sound of voices outside. Sarah sat up, heart hammering. Gray dawn light filtered through the window. She could hear men talking, low and urgent. She grabbed Thomas's shotgun and moved to the door. Outside, Ethan stood with two other men. One was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and only one arm. The other was younger, broad-shouldered, with the hands of someone who worked metal for a living. Ethan saw her and raised a hand. It is all right. These are friends. The one-armed man smiled. Ma'am, name's Jedediah Stone. Folks call me Jeb. Served with Ethan back when he wore a badge. The younger man nodded. Lucas Garrett, town blacksmith. Known Ethan since we were boys. Sarah lowered the shotgun but kept it close. Why are you here? Because Ethan asked us to be, Jeb said. And when Ethan Cross asks for help, you do not say no. Ethan looked at Sarah. If we are going to trap Wolf, we need more than just the two of us. We need people we can trust. People who know how to fight. Fight? Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. I thought we were going to prove Thomas was murdered. We are, but Wolf is not going to let us do it peacefully. Ethan gestured to the house, the barn, the land. This is worth more than you know. And men like Wolf do not give up what they want just because someone asked nicely. Lucas stepped forward. Ma'am, there is something you should know. About a month before your husband died, he came to my shop, asked me to check the survey markers on your property. He thought someone had been moving them at night, trying to make it look like your land was smaller than it really was. Sarah's blood went cold. Did he find proof? He said he was going to report it to the land office in Cheyenne. Said if Wolf was cheating on land boundaries, the federal government would step in. Lucas's face was grim. 2 weeks later, your husband was dead. So Thomas was killed because he discovered Wolf was stealing land. Not just land, Ethan said quietly. Water. Your well is the deepest in 50 miles. The aquifer runs under your property and nowhere else. Whoever controls your land controls the only reliable water source in this valley. And Wolf needs water. He has 12,000 head of cattle and no way to keep them alive through summer without it. Then why not just offer to buy from us? Because Thomas would have said no, and because Wolf does not buy what he can take. Sarah looked at these three men standing in her yard, strangers yesterday, allies today. She did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified. What do we do? She finally asked. Ethan's gray eyes were hard as stone. We set a trap. We make Wolf think you are ready to sell, that you are too scared and too tired to fight anymore. And when he comes to take what he thinks he has won, we will be waiting. And then we make him confess. In front of witnesses he cannot buy or threaten. We make him tell the truth about what he did to Thomas. How do we do that? Ethan smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just found his prey. Leave that to me. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan, Jeb, and Lucas worked like men who had done this before. They strung thin wire 6 inches off the ground around the house, invisible in the grass. They hung tin cans on string, creating alarms that would rattle if anyone came too close. They positioned lanterns at strategic points, ready to flood the yard with light at a moment's notice. And they taught Sarah how to shoot. Not the clumsy, frightened shooting of someone who had never held a gun, but the calm, deliberate shooting of someone who understood that hesitation meant death. Breathe out, Ethan instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of bottles on the fence. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. Squeeze. Sarah exhaled and squeezed. The shotgun kicked against her shoulder, and a bottle exploded into glass dust. Again. She reloaded and fired. Another bottle shattered. Good. Remember, if someone comes through that door uninvited, you do not ask questions. You fire. Sarah lowered the shotgun, feeling the weight of it in her hands, the weight of what Ethan was asking her to become. I do not know if I can kill him, she said quietly. You will know when the time comes. Because when that moment arrives, it will not be about killing. It will be about saving Emma. He was right. Sarah knew he was right, because there was nothing she would not do to keep her daughter safe. Nothing. On the third day, Sarah rode into town alone. She wore her best black dress, the one she had married Thomas in, now dyed for mourning. Her face was carefully composed, tired, defeated, exactly what Wolf would expect to see. She went to the saloon just after noon, when the morning drinkers were settling in and the afternoon crowd had not yet arrived. Rebecca Hayes, the owner, looked up from wiping glasses and gave Sarah a subtle nod. Ethan had spoken to her. She knew what was coming. Sarah sat at a corner table, ordered a whiskey she did not intend to drink, and waited. It did not take long. Nathaniel Wolf entered through the back door like a king inspecting his domain. He was a large man, not fat but solid, with silver hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore an expensive suit, a gold watch chain, and the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. He saw Sarah immediately. Of course he did. She was the only woman in the saloon and, more importantly, she was the prize he had been hunting for months. Wolf did not approach her table. He simply caught her eye, raised his glass of brandy in a mock toast, and smiled. It was the smile of a wolf that had just caught the scent of blood. Sarah looked away, letting her shoulders slump, letting him see weakness, letting him think he had already won. She finished her untouched whiskey and stood to leave. As she passed the bar, she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Mrs. Hayes, if anyone asks, I am selling the ranch. I cannot do it anymore. Not alone, not without Thomas. The saloon went quiet. Every man there turned to look at her. And in the corner, Nathaniel Wolf's smile grew wider. Sarah walked out into the October sun, mounted her horse, and rode home. Behind her, she knew the trap had been set. Now all she could do was wait for Wolf to step into it. That night, as promised, the footsteps came. Sarah sat in the dark kitchen, shotgun across her lap, listening. Emma was upstairs, hopefully asleep. Ethan was somewhere outside, invisible in the shadows. Jeb and Lucas were hidden in the barn, and the footsteps circled, slow, patient, letting her know they were there. But tonight was different. Tonight, Sarah was not alone. Tonight, she was not prey. She was bait. The footsteps stopped near the well. Sarah heard voices, low and urgent. She could not make out words, but she recognized the tone. Men arguing, men making a decision. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of liquid splashing, the sharp chemical smell of kerosene. They were going to burn her out. Sarah stood, heart hammering. This was not part of the plan. Ethan had said they would come to intimidate, maybe to threaten, not to kill. She moved to the window and saw them. 3 men carrying cans of fuel, splashing it along the side of the barn. In the moonlight, she could see their faces. One of them was Vincent Crane. Sarah recognized him from town. He was Wolf's foreman, the man who did the jobs that required cruelty and silence. And on his vest, she could see the glint of brass buttons. She raised the shotgun, aiming through the window. Her hands were steady. Her breath was calm. She had promised Emma she would survive, and she was not about to break that promise. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The shotgun blast shattered the night like thunder. The window exploded outward in a spray of glass and wood. Vincent Crane screamed and fell, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 men scattered, running for the darkness. But they did not get far. Ethan appeared from behind the barn like a ghost made solid. He moved with the cold efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. One man went down with a rifle butt to the back of the head. The other ran straight into Jeb, who clotheslined him with his one good arm and sent him sprawling into the dirt. Lucas emerged from the shadows, shotgun leveled, making sure no one tried to run. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, still holding the smoking shotgun. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. She had just shot a man. She had pulled the trigger and heard him scream and watched him fall. She had become exactly what Ethan said she needed to be, a survivor. Ethan dragged Vincent Crane into the lamplight spilling from the house. The man was bleeding from his shoulder, his face twisted in pain and rage. "You crazy Apache witch," he snarled. "You are dead, you hear me? Wolf will kill you. He will kill all of you." Ethan slammed Crane down into a chair on the porch. "Start talking. Who ordered you to burn this house?" "Go to hell." Ethan pulled out his knife, an old Bowie blade worn smooth with use. He did not threaten. He just held it where Crane could see it, letting the man's imagination do the work. "5 years ago," Ethan said quietly, "someone came to my house, killed my wife, killed my son, and when I tracked the footprints, they led to a man wearing boots just like yours, boots with a steel groove in the heel." Crane's face went pale. "That was you, was it not?" Ethan's voice was still soft, but there was murder in every syllable. "You were the one Wolf sent to make sure I understood the cost of defying him." "I do not know what you are talking about." Ethan leaned in close. "Then explain why your boot print matches the one I found in my son's bedroom. Explain why my wife's blood is on your conscience." Crane tried to pull away, but Ethan held him with one hand, the knife gleaming in the other. "Talk, or I will make you wish you had." And something in Ethan's eyes, something ancient and merciless, broke through Crane's defiance. "All right," he gasped. "All right, Wolf paid me $500 to send a message to Judge Cross. But the judge was already dead, so Wolf said to hit his family instead. I did not want to, I swear. But Wolf said if I did not do it, he would kill me." Sarah felt the world tilt. Judge Cross, Ethan's father. The connection suddenly made terrible sense. Ethan's hand tightened on the knife. For a moment, Sarah thought he would use it, thought she would watch this man die on her porch, and there would be nothing she could do to stop it. But then Ethan stepped back. The knife disappeared into its sheath. "Jeb," he said, "tie him up. We are taking him to the sheriff." "Sheriff Quinn will not do anything," Jeb said. "Sayantan, he is too scared of Wolf." "Then we will make him brave." Sarah looked at the three men tied up in her yard, looked at the kerosene soaking into the ground where they had planned to burn her alive, looked at Ethan Cross, the stranger who had become her only hope. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked. Ethan turned to her, and for the first time she saw something other than cold determination in his eyes. She saw grief, raw and bleeding. "Because I was not there when my family needed me, and I will not make that mistake again." The night grew quiet. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching her doll, eyes wide but unafraid. She looked at her mother holding the shotgun, looked at the men tied up in the yard, and something changed in her face. She walked down the steps, slowly, until she stood in front of Vincent Crane. She did not speak, but she raised one small hand and pointed at him. Crane's face went white. The kid was there, at the river. Ethan knelt beside Emma. "Did you see this man hurt your father?" Emma nodded. "Did he push your father into the water?" Emma nodded again, and this time tears began to fall silently down her cheeks. Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her as she shook with silent sobs. This was the first time Emma had been able to tell anyone what she had seen. The first time she had been able to point at the monster and say, "That one. He did it." It was a beginning, small, fragile, but a beginning nonetheless. Ethan stood and looked at Vincent Crane with eyes like winter death. "You are going to tell Sheriff Quinn everything. You are going to confess to killing Thomas Blackfeather. And you are going to name Nathaniel Wolf as the man who ordered it. Do you understand?" Crane's head dropped. "If I do that, Wolf will kill me in jail. If you do not do it, I will kill you right here." Ethan's voice held no emotion, just certainty. Choose. Crane chose to live, at least for now. As dawn broke over Hart Ridge, Sarah stood on her porch watching the first light touch the mountains. Ethan and the others had taken Crane and his men into town. She had stayed behind with Emma, both of them too exhausted to do anything but watch the sunrise. "Do you think it is over?" Emma whispered. Sarah gasped. She turned to her daughter, hardly daring to believe what she had just heard. "Emma, You spoke. The little girl looked up at her mother with eyes that were no longer empty. Is it over, Mama? Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma close, tears streaming down her face. No, little one, it is not over yet, but it will be. I promise you, it will be. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Sarah believed her own words. The fight was not finished. Wolf still walked free, the land was still in danger. But something had shifted, something important. They were no longer victims waiting to be crushed. They were fighters who had drawn first blood. And in the hard country of Wyoming, in the autumn of 1887, that made all the difference. Sheriff Marcus Quinn sat behind his desk like a man facing his own execution. The morning sun cut through the dirty windows of his office, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts. In the corner, Vincent Crane sat handcuffed to a chair, his shoulder bandaged but still bleeding through the cloth. The other 2 men from the night raid occupied the cell in back, their faces pressed against the bars, watching everything with the desperate eyes of trapped animals. Ethan Cross stood by the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. But his presence filled the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. Jeb and Lucas flanked him, equally silent, equally patient. Quinn looked at the confession he had just finished writing. His hand trembled as he set down the pen. 25 years wearing a badge, and it had come to this. A choice between the law he had sworn to uphold and the man who owned his debts, his home, his very soul. This is my signature, he said quietly, not looking at anyone. This document states that Vincent Crane has confessed to the murder of Thomas Blackfeather on orders from Nathaniel Wolfe. It states that the murder was committed for the purpose of illegally acquiring land. And it states that I, as sheriff of Sheridan County, am issuing a warrant for Nathaniel Wolfe's arrest. He looked up at Ethan. You know what this means. Wolfe owns half this county. He has lawyers. He has judges. He has more money than God himself. Then we make sure everyone knows what he did, Ethan said. Not just the law, the whole town. How? We bring it into the light. Tomorrow morning, Main Street. We make Crane repeat his confession in front of everyone. And we bring Emma to identify him as the man she saw kill her father. Quinn's face went gray. You want to put a child on display? Make her relive the worst day of her life in front of a crowd? I want to give her justice, Ethan said coldly. And I want to make sure Wolfe cannot buy his way out of this with a backroom deal and a judge who looks the other way. Emma already spoke, Quinn said. Last night, she told you Crane was the one. She told us. Now she needs to tell Sheridan. Crane laughed from his chair, a wet, ugly sound. You think that matters? You think people will believe some half-breed kid over Nathaniel Wolfe? You are all dead, every one of you. Ethan walked over to Crane slowly. He did not touch the man, did not threaten him, just looked down at him with those winter eyes and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, you took everything from me. My wife, my son, my reason for living. I have spent every day since then wondering if I should just put a bullet in my head and be done with it. He leaned closer. But now I have a reason to stay alive, and that reason is watching you hang. Crane's laughter died. Quinn stood up, the chair scraping loudly in the quiet room. I will do it. I will organize a public hearing tomorrow morning. But Ethan, you need to understand something. Wolfe is not going to just sit back and let this happen. When he finds out I have arrested his man and issued a warrant for him, he is going to come. And he is going to come with everyone he has. Good, Ethan said. Let him come. We will be ready. But as they walked out into the morning sun, Jeb pulled Ethan aside. Ready with what? There are 4 of us. Wolfe has 30 men, all of them armed, all of them loyal. This is not a fight we can win with bullets. Then we win it with something else. What? Ethan looked toward the telegraph office at the end of the street. The law that Wolfe cannot buy. Federal law. 20 minutes later, Ethan stood in the telegraph office, composing a message to Denver. The operator, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, watched him write. To Benjamin Hart, attorney at law, Denver, Colorado. Stop. Murder and land fraud in Sheridan County. Stop. Local law compromise. Stop. Need federal intervention immediately. Stop. Ethan Cross, the operator, read the message and whistled low. Benjamin Hart, the man who prosecuted half the land barons in Colorado, you know him? He knew my father, Judge Edward Cross. Ethan laid coins on the counter. Send it now, fastest rate. Yes, sir. But Mr. Cross, you should know, if word gets out that you are calling in federal lawyers, Nathaniel Wolf is going to consider that an act of war. Then it is a good thing I have been to war before. The message went out over the wire, electrical pulses carrying words across hundreds of miles of empty prairie. In Denver, a man would receive those words. And if Ethan had judged correctly, that man would remember a promise made years ago to a judge who had once saved his career. Help would come. The question was whether it would come in time. Meanwhile, Sarah spent that morning at the land office, this time with purpose instead of desperation. This time with purpose instead of desperation. The same clerk who had dismissed her days before now looked at her with something approaching respect. Fear did that to people, made them see what they had previously ignored. I need copies of my land deed, Sarah said. All surveys, all documentation proving Thomas Blackfeather legally claimed this property under the Homestead Act of 1862. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. That will take some time, Mrs. Blackfeather. I have time, 2 months to be exact, until November 15th. You are aware that the hearing tomorrow may change things? I am aware that Nathaniel Wolf will do everything in his power to take my land, and I am aware that the best defense is documentation he cannot forge or destroy. The clerk nodded slowly. I will have everything ready by this afternoon. As Sarah left the land office, she felt eyes on her. Not the casual glances of townsfolk going about their business, but focused, predatory attention. She turned and saw 2 men leaning against a storefront across the street. They wore the same brass button vests as Vincent Crane. Wolf's men. They did not approach her, did not call out. They just watched, making sure she knew she was being watched. Sarah held her head high and walked to where her horse was tied. Her hands shook as she mounted, but she did not let them see it. She had learned something important over the past few days. Fear was a weapon only if you showed it. She rode out of town with those eyes burning into her back. That afternoon, a stranger arrived in Sheridan on the 3 o'clock train from Cheyenne. He was an older man, maybe 55, with silver hair and steel-rimmed spectacles. He wore a black suit that had been expensive once and was still well-maintained. He carried a leather satchel that bulged with papers. He walked directly to Rebecca Hayes' saloon and asked for Ethan Cross. Rebecca studied him carefully. Who is asking? Benjamin Hart, attorney at law. I received a telegram this morning from an old friend. Rebecca's face broke into a smile. Upstairs, second door on the right. He is expecting you. Hart climbed the narrow stairs and knocked. Ethan's voice called for him to enter. When the door opened, the 2 men stood looking at each other for a long moment. Then Hart extended his hand. It has been too many years, Ethan. 5, since my father's funeral. He would be proud of what you are doing. He would be ashamed it took me this long. Hart set his satchel on the small table and began pulling out documents. I took the liberty of researching Nathaniel Wolf on the train ride up. Interesting man. He was convicted of land fraud 15 years ago by your father, served 7 years in territorial prison. Since his release, he has acquired over 12,000 acres and 8,000 head of cattle. All of it legal? That depends on your definition of legal. He has used every loophole, every technicality, every questionable survey to expand his holdings, but nothing that a court could definitively call fraud. Hart pulled out a map. Until now, because this survey shows that 3 of his land acquisitions were based on boundary markers that were moved after the original surveys were filed. Ethan leaned forward. Can you prove it? With time and resources, yeah. But more importantly, I can prove that Thomas Blackfeather discovered this fraud and was murdered to keep him silent. That elevates this from a local murder case to federal criminal conspiracy, and that means the case can be tried in federal court, not county court, where Wolf cannot buy the judge. Exactly. Ethan sat back, allowing himself the smallest hint of a smile. How long do you need? To build a case that will stand up in federal court? 3 months minimum. We have 48 hours before Wolf makes his move. Hart removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. Then we need to survive 48 hours. And we need to make sure that when Wolf does make his move, He does it in front of witnesses who cannot be intimidated or bought. The public hearing tomorrow. Yes, but a hearing is not enough. We need Wolf himself to incriminate himself. Not just his men, the man himself. He is too smart for that. Every man has a breaking point, Ethan. Even Nathaniel Wolf. We just need to find his. As evening fell over Sheridan, word spread through the town like wildfire. There would be a hearing tomorrow morning. Main Street, 10 o'clock. Vincent Crane would confess to murder, a child would testify, and a warrant had been issued for Nathaniel Wolf. In the grand house on the hill overlooking Sheridan, Nathaniel Wolf received this news with a calm that was more terrifying than rage. He sat in his study, surrounded by books he had never read and art he had never appreciated, symbols of wealth that meant nothing beyond their price. His second in command, a thin man named Pike, stood before him nervously. The sheriff has turned. Cross Broward. In a federal fire, they are moving the whole thing into the open. Wolf sipped brandy from a crystal glass. Then we make sure nothing reaches the open. Sir, tonight we finish this. We go to Hart Ridge with everyone. We burn the ranch. We eliminate Cross and anyone helping him. And we make sure that by morning there is no one left to testify. Pike swallowed hard. That is 30 men, sir. That is an army. That is war. Wolf stood, walking to the window where he could see his empire spreading out below him. 12,000 acres, 8,000 cattle. More money than 3 generations of his family had ever dreamed of. And it was all built on being willing to do what weaker men would not. Then we go to war, he said quietly, because I did not build all of this to lose it to a half-breed widow and a washed-up marshal. He turned to Pike. Gather everyone. Tell them there is a $500 bonus for every man who rides tonight. And tell them that by dawn, Hart Ridge will be ours. Pike left to carry out his orders. Wolf remained at the window, watching the sun set over the town he owned. He had killed before to protect what was his. He would kill again. And when it was over, no one would dare question him because that was what power meant. The ability to make problems disappear. At Hart Ridge, preparations were underway. Ethan had sent Lucas back to town to bring Rebecca. She arrived as darkness fell, carrying her own shotgun in a grim determination. I knew Thomas, she said to Sarah. He was a good man. And good men are rare enough that we should fight for them even after they are gone. Emma watched the adults moving around the ranch with weapons and serious faces. She sat on the porch, still clutching her doll, but her eyes were clear now, alert. She had found her voice, but she had not yet found her courage to use it beyond whispers. Sarah sat beside her daughter and took her small hand. Are you frightened? Emma nodded. Me too. But your father told me something once. He said fear is not the enemy. Fear is what keeps us alive. It is giving in to fear that kills us. What if the bad men come? Then we fight, and we survive. Because that is what Blackfeathers do. Emma looked at her mother with old eyes in a young face. Will Mr. Cross keep us safe? Sarah glanced across the yard where Ethan was checking rifles with Jeb. Mr. Cross will do everything he can, but in the end we keep ourselves safe. No one else can do it for us. Papa tried to keep us safe and he died. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pulled Emma close, feeling the small body trembling. Your papa was brave, and being brave does not mean you cannot lose. It means you fight anyway, even knowing you might. Then I want to be brave like Papa. Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head, tasting salt from tears she had not realized she was crying. You already are, little one. You already are. As full dark settled over the ranch, Ethan gathered everyone in the house. 6 people against what was coming. The odds were not good. They will come tonight, Ethan said without preamble. Wolf knows he is out of time. He knows we have evidence and witnesses. His only move is to eliminate everyone before morning. How many? Rebecca asked. Pike usually handles Wolf's enforcement. He can call on maybe 25 men who will do anything for money. Add Wolf himself and a few ranch hands who do not know better, and we are looking at 30. Jeb whistled low. 30 against 6. I have had worse odds. When? Never actually, but there is a first time for everything. Despite the tension, a few people smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind soldiers shared before battle. The kind that said, we know we might die, but at least we will die together. Ethan laid out his plan. It was simple because complicated plans fell apart when the bullets started flying. They would use the same traps as before, but more of them. They would create crossfire positions that would force Wolf's men into kill zones. And they would make noise, lots of noise, because noise attracted attention, and attention was the last thing Wolf wanted. Our goal is not to kill everyone, Ethan said. Our goal is to survive until dawn. If we can hold them off for 6 hours, the hearing goes forward. Crane testifies, Wolf is arrested, and this is over. And if we cannot hold them, Lucas asked, then we die defending what is right, which is better than living after running away. No one argued with that. They took their positions as midnight approached. Ethan on the roof with a Winchester, Jeb behind the well with a shotgun and his one good arm, Lucas in the barn with a rifle, Rebecca inside the house with Sarah and Emma, both women armed. Benjamin Hart stood in the kitchen, looking oddly calm for a man who spent his life in courtrooms, not battlefields. I have not fired a gun in 30 years, he said to Sarah, but I suppose tonight is as good a night as any to remember how. Sarah handed him Thomas's old revolver. Point and shoot. That is all there is to it. I suspect there is quite a bit more to it than that, Emma said. Yes, but you will learn fast if you want to live. They waited in darkness, listening to the sounds of the prairie, coyotes calling, wind moving through grass, and then, around 1 in the morning, something else. Hoofbeats, lots of them. Ethan saw them first, a dark mass moving across the open ground like a storm cloud made of men and horses. They came from the south, following the road that led to Hart Ridge. 20 riders at least, maybe more, carrying torches that turned the night into flickering hell. Ethan fired a shot into the air. The signal. Inside the house, Rebecca extinguished the lamps. Jeb crouched lower behind the well. Lucas chambered around and whispered a prayer he had learned as a boy and had not said in 40 years. The riders stopped 50 yards out, just beyond rifle range. Nathaniel Wolf rode at their head, his face illuminated by torchlight. He looked like a devil, Sarah thought, like something that had crawled up from a place where mercy had no meaning. Ethan Cross, Wolf's voice carried across the empty space. I know you are in there. Come out and face me like a man, instead of hiding behind women and cripples. Ethan stood up on the roof, silhouetted against the stars. I am right here, Wolf. Come and get me. This is your last chance. Send out Sarah Blackfeather. She signs the deed over to me. I pay her a fair price, and everyone walks away. Everyone except Thomas Blackfeather, who is already dead because of you. Thomas Blackfeather was a fool who did not know when to mind his own business. He was a better man than you will ever be. Wolf's face twisted with rage. Then you can die with his memory. He raised his hand. Burn them out! The riders charged. They came in 3 groups, spreading out to surround the house. The first group made it 10 yards before Ethan started firing. His Winchester cracked like thunder, precise and deadly. A rider fell, then another. The horses screamed and reared, throwing men into the dirt. Jeb opened up from behind the well, shotgun roaring. At that range, he did not need to aim carefully. Anyone who came close enough died. Lucas fired from the barn, methodical and calm, picking off riders who tried to circle around the back. But there were too many of them. For every man who fell, 2 more kept coming. The first torch hit the barn roof. Flames caught immediately, hungry and bright. Lucas had to abandon his position, running through fire and smoke, his coat burning. He rolled in the dirt to put it out, then crawled toward the house, bullets kicking up dust around him. A second torch came through a window. Rebecca was there instantly, smothering it with a wet blanket before it could spread. But she knew they could not stop them all. Sarah, she yelled, get Emma to the root cellar, now! Sarah grabbed her daughter and ran for the trap door hidden under the kitchen rug. She pulled it open, revealing the dark space below. It smelled of earth and potatoes and safety. No, Mama, Emma cried. I do not want to go down there. You have to, baby. You have to stay safe. I want to stay with you. And I need you alive. Sarah's voice cracked. Please, Emma. Please go down. Emma looked at her mother with tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded and climbed down the ladder. Sarah closed the trap door and pulled the rug back over it. When she stood up, a bullet came through the wall 6 inches from her head. The battle became chaos. Ethan was forced off the roof when men started firing at his position from multiple angles. He dropped through the attic hatch, reloading as he moved, and took up position at a second-floor window. Below, Wolf's men were at the doors, trying to break through. Benjamin Hart, who had not fired a gun in 3 decades, stood at the front door and put 3 rounds through the wood. Someone outside screamed. The door held. But the windows were breaking. Glass shattered. Men started climbing through. Rebecca shot one in the chest at point-blank range. The sound in the confined space was deafening. The man fell backward, taking another with him. Jeb appeared in the doorway, bleeding from a cut on his head, but still fighting. His shotgun was empty. He used it like a club, breaking the jaw of a man who came through the back door. Lucas made it inside, his coat still smoking. He grabbed ammunition from the box Ethan had prepared and started reloading everything he could find. Sarah stood in the center of it all, Thomas's shotgun in her hands, and understood something fundamental about herself. She was not going to die here. She was not going to let Emma become an orphan. She was going to survive, no matter what that required. A man came through the window behind her. Sarah spun and fired without thinking. The man went down, clutching his stomach, screaming. She had killed someone. She felt nothing except the need to reload. Outside, Nathaniel Wolf watched his men falter. They were dying, and for what? To take land from a widow? He had paid them well, but money meant nothing to corpses. Pike rode up beside him, his face pale. "Sir, we have lost 8 men. This is not working. They are too well defended." "Then we burn the whole place down, set fire to everything. They cannot fight if they are too busy running from flames. There is a child in there. Then the child dies too." Wolf's voice was cold as winter stone. "I did not come this far to lose to sentiment." Pike hesitated, and in that hesitation, Wolf saw weakness, saw doubt, and Wolf had no use for either. "Give me your torch," Wolf said. Pike handed it over, and Wolf rode forward himself, alone, holding the burning brand high. He was 20 yards from the house when Ethan appeared in an upstairs window. "Wolf!" Ethan's voice cut through the sound of gunfire. "Come one step closer, and I will put a bullet through your heart." Wolf stopped. He looked up at Ethan with something that might have been respect. "You are a better man than I gave you credit for, Cross, but better men do not win. Rich men win, strong men win, men who are willing to do what others will not. Is that what you told yourself when you had my wife and son murdered?" "I told myself they were in the way, just like you are in the way now." "Then come and move me, Gaswan," Wolf smiled. "I do not have to. I just have to wait for you to run out of ammunition, or burn you out. Either way, by dawn, you are all dead, and this land is mine." He was right. Ethan knew he was right. They had maybe an hour of ammunition left, maybe less. And the fires were growing. The barn was fully engulfed. Flames were licking at the house roof. They were going to lose, unless they changed the game entirely. Ethan made a decision. He stood up fully in the window, making himself a target, and yelled loud enough for everyone to hear. "Nathaniel Wolf, you want this land? Then let us settle this like men. You and me. Right now, winner takes everything." The shooting stopped. Everyone, on both sides, turned to look. Wolf laughed. "You think I am stupid enough to fight you one-on-one? You were a marshal. You have killed dozens of men. And you are a coward who sends others to do his killing. Prove me wrong. Step down from that horse and face me. If you win, Sarah Blackfeather will sign over the deed and leave Wyoming forever. If I win, you confess to everything and your men ride away." Wolf's pride warred with his caution. He looked at the house, at the people inside who were still fighting despite being outnumbered 5-1. He looked at his own men, some of whom were watching him now with questions in their eyes. If he refused, he would look weak, and weakness was something a man like Wolf could not afford. "Fine," he said, dismounting. "Let us end this." Ethan came down from the house, walking out into the yard between the two forces. In the flickering torchlight and burning barn, he looked like a ghost. Something already dead but refusing to lie down. Wolf drew his pistol, a fine Colt with ivory grips. Ethan had left his rifle inside. He carried only his father's old revolver, worn and plain. They stood 30 feet apart. "On 3, Wolf said. 1. Ethan's hands hung loose at his sides. 2. Sarah watched from the window, hardly breathing. This was insane. This was suicide. 3. Both men drew. 2 shots rang out, so close together they sounded like Wyandanist one. Wolf staggered backward, a red stain spreading across his white shirt. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. Ethan stood untouched. Pike and the other men rushed to Wolf, catching him before he fell. The rancher looked down at his chest, at the blood pulsing between his fingers, and something like surprise crossed his face. "I was faster," he whispered. "I was faster than you." "You were," Ethan agreed, walking closer. "But I was more accurate." Wolf's legs gave out. He sat heavily in the dirt, his back against Pike. He looked up at the stars, and for just a moment, something human flickered in his eyes. "My father was a sharecropper," he said quietly. "Died with nothing. I swore I would die rich. I guess 1 out of 2 is not bad." "You are not dead yet," Ethan said. "Yes, I am. I just have not stopped moving." He was right. The wound was mortal. Wolf would be dead in minutes, but minutes were enough. "Did you order the death of Thomas Blackfeather?" Ethan asked. Wolf laughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "What does it matter now?" "It matters to his daughter. It matters to his widow. It matters to everyone you have crushed on your way to being rich." Wolf looked past Ethan to where Sarah stood in the doorway of her bullet-riddled home, smoke still rising from the burned barn behind her. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing that she had ever seen. "Yes, I ordered it. Thomas Blackfeather discovered I was stealing federal land by moving survey markers. He was going to report me. So I had Vincent Crane kill him and make it look like an accident." He coughed. More blood. "And 5 years ago, I had Crane kill your family. Cross. Because your father put me in prison, and I wanted him to know what loss felt like. But the old man was already dead, so I settled for making his son suffer instead." The confession hung in the air. 40 witnesses heard it. 40 men who would carry those words back to Sheridan, to the territory, to federal courts that could not be bought or intimidated. Nathaniel Wolf died 30 seconds later, there in the dirt, surrounded by the men he had paid to kill for him, and not one of them mourned. Pike stood slowly, looking at Ethan with hollow eyes. "What happens now?" "Now you ride away. All of you. And tomorrow morning you give statements to the federal lawyer. You tell him everything Wolf ordered you to do. And maybe, just maybe, you will not hang alongside Crane. And if we refuse, then I hunt you down one by one and I make sure you join your boss in hell." The men looked at each other. Then without a word, they mounted their horses and rode into the darkness, leaving their dead where they fell. The Battle of Hart Ridge was over. Sarah stood in what remained of her home as dawn broke. The barn was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. The house was damaged, walls full of bullet holes, windows shattered, but standing, still standing. Emma emerged from the root cellar, squinting in the morning light. She ran to her mother, and Sarah caught her, holding her so tight it hurt. "Is it over, Mama?" "Yes, baby, it is over." Ethan walked through the carnage, checking the bodies, making sure no one was pretending to be dead. When he was satisfied, he returned to where Sarah stood with Emma. "Wolf confessed," he said, "in front of 40 witnesses. Benjamin Hart has enough testimony to clear your husband's name and secure your land. It is truly over." Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. Then she did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and hugged Ethan Cross, this stranger who had become their salvation. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us our lives back." Ethan stood stiff, unused to being touched, unused to gratitude. But slowly, carefully, he put his arms around Sarah and Emma both. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. The hearing that morning was anticlimactic. Sheriff Quinn stood before the assembled citizens of Sheridan and read the statements given by 40 witnesses to Nathaniel Wolf's deathbed confession. Vincent Crane, seeing no point in further lies, confirmed everything. Benjamin Hart stood and addressed the crowd. Under federal law, all land fraudulently acquired by Nathaniel Wolf will be returned to its rightful owners or auctioned fairly. Sarah Blackfeather's claim to Hart Ridge is uncontested and legally sound, and those who participated in criminal conspiracy at Wolf's direction will face trial in federal court. The crowd murmured, some with approval, some with shock. The titan who had ruled Sheridan County for 15 years was dead, and the empire he had built on blood and lies was crumbling. Sarah stood before them all, no longer the frightened widow they had dismissed. She was something else now, something harder, something that had survived fire and bullets and loss and come through it whole. Emma stood beside her mother, holding her hand, and when the crowd looked at them, they saw not victims, but survivors. That was the difference. That was what mattered. After the hearing, as people dispersed, Sheriff Quinn approached Sarah. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. The weight of his choices had carved new lines in his face. "Mrs. Blackfeather," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I am sorry. I knew Wolf was dangerous. I knew he was breaking the law. But I was afraid, and that fear made me weak. Your husband deserved better. You deserve better." Sarah looked at this man who had failed her when she needed him most. She should hate him. She wanted to hate him, but all she felt was tired. Fear is not a sin, Sheriff, but choosing fear over what is right, that is where we fail. She paused. "My husband used to say that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. Maybe you can remember that next time." Quinn nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then he walked away, a man who would carry his shame until his last breath. Benjamin Hart approached Ethan as the crowd thinned. "What will you do now? Come back to being a marshal? The territory could use a man like you." Ethan looked across the street to where Sarah and Emma were climbing into their wagon. "I think my marshal days are over. I think I have been running from myself long enough." "Then what?" "Then I help rebuild what was burned, and I try to become the kind of man who deserves a second chance." Hart smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "Your father would be proud, Ethan. Not of what you did last night, but of what you are choosing to do today." They shook hands, and Hart returned to the telegraph office to begin the long process of dismantling Wolf's empire and returning justice to Sheridan County. Ethan mounted his horse and rode out to Hart Ridge. He found Sarah and Emma already there, standing in front of the damaged house, trying to figure out where to begin. "You came back," Sarah said when she saw him. "I said I would help rebuild. That could take months. I have nowhere else to be." Sarah smiled, and it was the first real smile Ethan had seen from her. "Then I suppose we should get started." They worked through that day and into the evening. Jeb and Lucas arrived with lumber and tools, and Rebecca brought food enough to feed an army. The whole town, it seemed, had decided that Hart Ridge deserved to survive. As the sun set on that long day, Emma sat on what remained of the porch and watched the adults work. Ethan paused and sat beside her. "How are you holding up, little one?" Emma thought about it carefully before answering. "Papa is still gone, but I do not feel so alone anymore." "That is because you are not alone. You have your mother, and you have people who will make sure you stay safe." "People like you?" "Yes, people like me." Omar leaned against Ethan's side, and he stiffened for just a moment before relaxing. She was so small, so fragile, like his son had been. "Mr. Cross?" Emma's voice was soft. "Will you stay? Even after the house is fixed?" Ethan looked at Sarah across the yard, covered in sawdust and sweat and more beautiful than he had any right to notice. Then he looked down at this child who had lost everything and was learning to be brave again. "Yes," he said, "I think I will." And for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Cross felt like he might have found something worth staying alive for. The work of rebuilding Hart Ridge had begun. But more than that, the work of rebuilding hearts had begun too. And in the hard country of Wyoming, in the autumn of 1887, that was the greatest victory of all. The first snow came early that year, dusting the blackened timbers of what had been Hart Ridge's barn with white that looked almost like forgiveness. Sarah stood in the doorway of her damaged house, a cup of coffee warming her hands, watching the flakes fall in the gray morning light. 3 weeks had passed since the night Nathaniel Wolf died in her yard. 3 weeks of sawing and hammering and slowly putting back together what violence had torn apart. Behind her, she could hear Emma humming softly as she drew pictures at the kitchen table. The child's voice had returned fully now, though she was still quiet by nature, choosing her words carefully as if they were precious things that should not be wasted. Sarah understood that impulse. After everything they had been through, silence felt safer than speech. But safety, Sarah was learning, was an illusion. The only real security came from being strong enough to face whatever came next. Ethan appeared from around the side of the house, carrying an armload of fresh-cut pine. His breath misted in the cold air, and his face was red from exertion. Over the past 3 weeks, he had become a permanent fixture at Hartridge, working from dawn until dark, sleeping in what remained of the barn loft, never asking for payment or acknowledgement. He had simply stayed. The new barn frame should be up by week's end, he said, setting the wood down near where the old barn had stood. Jeb and Lucas are bringing more lumber this afternoon. Sarah nodded, sipping her coffee. You do not have to do all this, you know. I can hire workers now that the land office confirmed my ownership. I know I do not have to. Ethan looked at her, those gray eyes direct and honest. But I want to. There was something in his voice that made Sarah's heart skip. Not fear, not anymore. Something else. Something she had thought died with Thomas, but was apparently only sleeping. Why? She asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow fall. 5 years ago, I lost everyone I cared about because I was not there when they needed me. I have spent every day since punishing myself for that failure. Living alone, pushing everyone away, believing I did not deserve to be happy because they were not. He turned to face her fully. But you and Emma, you showed me something. You showed me that surviving is not the same as living. And that maybe, just maybe, the best way to honor the people we lost is not to die with them, but to live for them. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas would have liked you. I hope so, because I am starting to think I might stay here permanently, if that would be all right with you. Before Sarah could answer, a voice called out from the road. They both turned to see Sheriff Quinn riding up, his horse picking its way carefully through the snow. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning by the door. Old habits died hard, but Quinn raised both hands as he approached, palms open in peace. Mrs. Blackfeather, Mr. Cross, I come with news, not trouble. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Quinn and Sarah without seeming to. What news? Quinn dismounted, his movements stiff and tired. He looked like a man who had not slept well in weeks. The federal investigation is complete. Every man who rode with Wolf that night has given testimony. Vincent Crane has been sentenced to hang for the murder of Thomas Blackfeather. The others are getting prison time, varying lengths depending on their involvement. Good, Sarah said coldly. There is more. The federal government is seizing all of Wolf's land holdings. They found evidence of fraud going back 15 years, moved boundary markers, forged deeds, intimidated witnesses. The whole empire was built on lies. Quinn pulled a document from his coat. This is for you, Mrs. Blackfeather. The government is deeding you an additional 40 acres as compensation for what you suffered. Water rights included. Sarah took the document with trembling hands. 200 acres total, enough land to build a real ranch, enough to secure Emma's future, enough to prove that Thomas had not died for nothing. Thank you, Sheriff. Quinn shook his head. Do not thank me. I should have stopped Wolf years ago. I should have been brave when it mattered. He looked at Ethan. You were right about me. I let fear make me weak. I am resigning at the end of the month. It is time someone better took this job. Fear does not make you weak, Ethan said quietly. It is what you do with that fear that defines you. You chose to do the right thing in the end. That counts for something. Quinn's eyes glistened. I hope so. I truly hope so. He remounted his horse and rode back toward town, a man trying to find redemption in the last act of his career. Sarah looked down at the deed in her hands. 200 acres, a future, a chance. We should celebrate, she said to Ethan. Tonight, a proper meal. Rebecca's bringing supplies, and I think we have earned something better than beans and hardtack. Ethan smiled, and it transformed his face. I would like that. That evening, the kitchen of the partially repaired house filled with warmth and the smell of roasting venison. Rebecca had indeed brought supplies, along with Jeb and Lucas. Benjamin Hart had stayed in Sheridan to oversee the legal proceedings, and he arrived just as the sun was setting, carrying a bottle of whiskey that he claimed was older than everyone present. They gathered around the table, 7 people who had become something like family through fire and blood. Emma sat between her mother and Ethan, looking at each face with the solemn attention of a child who understood she was witnessing something important. Hart raised his glass. To Thomas Blackfeather, a man who believed in justice even when justice failed him. May we honor his memory by building something good on the foundation he laid. And to Thomas, they echoed and drank. The meal was simple but felt like a feast after weeks of hardship. They ate and talked, sharing stories that had nothing to do with violence or death. Jeb told absurd tales from his cavalry days. Rebecca shared gossip from town that made even Ethan laugh. Lucas talked about his plans to expand his blacksmith shop now that Wolf's monopoly was broken. Sarah watched them all and then felt something she had not felt in months. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of people who would help carry the burden when it became too heavy. After dinner, Emma tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Mr. Cross, will you teach me to shoot tomorrow, like you taught Mama?" Sarah started to object, but Ethan spoke first. "If your mother agrees, yes, every person should know how to protect themselves. I am 7 years old. I was 6 when my father taught me." Emma looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Sarah sighed, knowing she had already lost this argument. "Fine, but you will start with a small rifle, and you will listen to every word Mr. Cross says. I promise." As the evening wore on and the others prepared to leave, Rebecca pulled Sarah aside. "That man is falling in love with you, you know." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That is ridiculous. Thomas has only been gone 3 months. Love does not follow a schedule, honey. It shows up when it shows up. And Ethan Cross looks at you and Emma like you hung the moon and stars. I barely know him. You know he is brave. You know he is loyal. You know he will die to protect you. What else do you need to know?" Sarah had no answer to that. After everyone left, Sarah put Emma to bed, tucking the blankets tight around her small frame. The child looked up at her mother with Thomas's eyes. "Mama, is it wrong to be happy when Papa is dead?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Oh, baby, no, it is not wrong. Your Papa would want you to be happy. He would want us both to keep living, to keep finding joy. Do you think Papa would like Mr. Cross? I think your Papa would be grateful that someone good is helping us. And I think he would trust Mr. Cross to take care of us." Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer. Within minutes, she was asleep. Sarah stood and found Ethan waiting on the porch, looking out at the snow-covered prairie. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. "You do not have to sleep in the barn anymore," she said quietly. "There is a spare room upstairs. It is not much, but it is warmer than the loft. I do not want people to talk. Let them talk. I am tired of living my life based on what other people think is proper." Ethan turned to look at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, Sarah could see something in his face that made her breath catch. Want, need, and beneath it all, a question he was afraid to ask. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I am not trying to replace Thomas. I could never do that. I know. But I am starting to care about you, about Emma, about this place, and I do not know if that is fair to you or appropriate or right. All I know is that for the first time in 5 years, I wake up wanting to be alive, and that is because of you." Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the cold night. "Ethan Cross, I do not need you to replace Thomas. I need you to be exactly who you are. A man who showed up when I had nothing. A man who fought when everyone else ran. A man who looks at my daughter like she matters. She does matter. You both do." Sarah reached up and touched his face, rough with stubble and cold from the night air. "Then stay. Not in the barn, not as a hired hand. Stay as part of this family." Ethan's hand covered hers, holding it against his cheek. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a kiss that tasted like snow and coffee and new beginnings. It was not the passionate kiss of youth, but the deliberate kiss of two people who had both lost everything and were learning to build something new from the ruins. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying, but they were not tears of sadness. "I am not ready to marry again," she said, needing him to understand. "It is too soon. I still love Thomas. I think I always will. I am not asking you to marry me. I am asking if I can stay, if I can be here, if I can help you build something worth protecting." Yes. To all of it, yes. They stood together on the porch until the cold drove them inside. Ethan took the spare room upstairs, and Sarah lay in her bed listening to him move around above her. It felt strange having someone else in the house, but it also felt right. Like pieces of a broken life were finally starting to fit back together. The winter that followed was hard, but not unbearable. Ethan and the others worked to finish the new barn before the deep snows came. They succeeded, with 2 days to spare, raising the final beam as the first major storm rolled in from the north. Emma thrived in ways Sarah had not dared hope. The child learned to shoot with a .22 rifle, hitting tin cans at 20 yards by Christmas. She learned to ride better, handle the cattle, do the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. But more than skills, she learned confidence. The terror that had made her mute was fading, replaced by the sturdy strength of a child who knew she was safe. Ethan proved to be a patient teacher. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration when Emma struggled. He had learned patience from loss, had learned that anger solved nothing, and Emma responded to his quiet strength like a flower turning toward the sun. On Christmas morning, such as it was on an isolated ranch, Emma gave Ethan a drawing she had made. It showed 3 figures standing in front of his house: a woman, a child, and a tall man with kind eyes. "That is us," Emma said. "That is our family." Ethan had to leave the room for a few minutes. When he returned, his eyes were red, but he was smiling. January brought news from town. Vincent Crane had been hanged for the murder of Thomas Blackfeather. He had confessed everything at the end, hoping for mercy that did not come. His last words were reported to be an apology to Sarah, though she doubted he had meant it. She felt nothing when she heard, no satisfaction, no closure, just a sense that one chapter had ended and another was beginning. February brought Benjamin Hart back to Hart Ridge. He carried documents that needed Sarah's signature, finalizing the federal seizure of Wolf's assets and the distribution of his lands to those he had wronged. "You are a wealthy woman now, Mrs. Blackfeather," Hart said over dinner. 200 acres, water rights, and a substantial cash settlement from the sale of Wolf's cattle. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life without working another day. Sarah looked around the kitchen of her home, at Emma doing homework by lamplight, at Ethan mending a bridle, at the life they were building together. "Wealth is not measured in acres or dollars," Shawadi said. "It is measured in safety, in family, in waking up without fear." She smiled. "By that measure, I am the richest woman in Wyoming." Hart raised his glass in salute. "Your husband would be proud of the woman you have become." "My husband made me this woman. He taught me to be strong, to believe in myself, to fight for what mattered." She glanced at Ethan. "And the people who came after taught me that strength is not about standings alone. It is about knowing when to accept help." That night, after Hart left and Emma was asleep, Sarah and Ethan sat on the porch despite the cold. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments watching the stars over the prairie. Hart said something interesting before he left. Ethan said, "He asked if I would consider becoming a federal marshal again. Said the territory needs men who understand justice." Sarah's heart clenched. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would think about it." He looked at her. "But the truth is, I do not want that life anymore. I spent years chasing criminals across empty country, sleeping in the rain, eating dust. And for what? I caught bad men, and more bad men took their place. It never ended. What do you want?" "This, right here, a place to belong, work that builds instead of destroys, a chance to see Emma grow up safe and strong." He paused. "A chance to maybe someday have a family again, if that is something you might want." Sarah took his hand. "Ask me again in a year, when the grief is not so fresh, when I have had time to say goodbye to Thomas properly." "But yes, Ethan, someday that is something I want." Spring came late but brilliant when it finally arrived. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, turning the land into a carpet of gold and purple and red. The cattle fattened on new grass. The well flowed pure and strong. Hart Ridge, which had nearly been destroyed, was thriving. In April, a letter arrived from the territorial governor. It was addressed to Sarah Blackfeather and contained an official commendation for her courage in standing against corruption. The letter noted that her actions had sparked a wider investigation into land fraud across Wyoming, leading to multiple arrests and the return of thousands of acres to rightful owners. Sarah read the letter once and then folded it away. She did not need the governor's approval. She had something better. She had survived. In May, on a morning brilliant with sunshine, Sarah rode to the place where Thomas had died. She had not been back since that terrible day Ethan had examined the scene and confirmed her worst fears. She dismounted and stood on the bank of Powder River, watching the water flow past. It was the same water that had taken her husband, but it was also water that fed her land, that kept her cattle alive, that made life possible in this hard country. "I loved you," she said aloud to the empty air. "I will always love you. You gave me Emma. You gave me this land. You gave me the strength to keep fighting. And I want you to know that I am all right now. I am safe. Emma is safe. We are building a good life. The life you wanted for us." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There is someone else now. His name is Ethan. He is a good man, Thomas. He is strong and kind, and he looks at Emma like she hung the moon. I think you would like him. I think you would trust him to take care of us." The wind moved through the grass, sounding almost like a voice. "I am not forgetting you," Sarah whispered. "I could never forget you. But I am learning to live again, and I think, wherever you are, you would want that for me." She stood there for a long time, letting the tears come and go. Then she remounted her horse and rode back to Hart Ridge, leaving the past beside the river where it belonged. In June, Emma turned 8 years old. They celebrated with a cake Rebecca made and gifts that were practical but cherished. Jeb gave her a leather belt with a knife sheath. Lucas made her a set of horseshoes for her pony. Ethan gave her a rifle, a proper one, size for her growing frame. And Sarah gave her something else, a letter sealed with Emma's name on the front in Thomas's handwriting. "Your father wrote this before he died," Sarah explained. "He wrote one for each year until you turned 18. He wanted you to have his words, his wisdom, even if he could not be here to give them in person." Emma held the letter like it was made of glass. "Can I read it now?" "It is yours to do with as you wish." Emma opened the seal carefully and read. Sarah watched her daughter's face, seeing emotions flicker across it. Sadness, joy, love. When she finished, Emma folded the letter and held it against her heart. "Papa said he was proud of me. He said no matter what happened, I should remember that I come from strong people. Apache people. People who survive. He was right. He also said that if he was gone, Mama would find a way. He said you were the strongest person he ever knew." Emma looked at Ethan. "And he said if Mama found someone new, someone good, that I should be happy, because that would mean we were not alone anymore." Ethan's eyes were bright. "Your father was a wise man. Will you really stay forever?" "If your mother will have me, yes." Emma looked at Sarah with a question in her eyes. Sarah nodded. That was all the answer the child needed. July brought a surprise. Rebecca arrived with a man Sarah had never met, a rancher from the next county who was looking to buy cattle. Hart Ridge's herd had grown to 80 head, more than Sarah could properly manage. The sale price was fair, reducing the herd to a manageable 40 and putting substantial cash in the ranch's account. Sarah used part of the money to buy chickens, improve the irrigation, and hire 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work. Ethan protested that he could handle it, but Sarah was firm. "You are not a hired hand," she said. "You are family, and family does not work themselves to death." By August, Hart Ridge was unrecognizable from the battle-scarred ruin of the previous autumn. The new barn stood solid and proud. The house had been fully repaired and even expanded, adding a proper dining room and a second-floor bedroom. Fences were mended, fields were planted. Life had returned. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant crimson and gold, Ethan found Sarah in the garden she had planted behind the house. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds from around tomato plants. "I have been thinking," he said. Sarah looked up, shading her eyes against the low sun. "About what?" "About what you said. About asking again in a year." "It has not been a year yet." "No, but it will be soon. And I want you to know that when it is, when enough time has passed, I would like to marry you. Properly. With Emma's blessing and the whole town watching." He knelt beside her in the dirt, not to replace Thomas, but to build something new alongside his memory. Sarah's hands were shaking, not from fear, from joy. Ask me in September, on the anniversary of the night we survived. If the answer is still yes, then it will be yes forever. And if it is not, then I will still want you here, still want you in our lives. But I will need more time. Ethan nodded, accepting this. That is fair. They worked in the garden together as the sun finished setting, pulling weeds and talking about nothing important. It was domestic and ordinary, and absolutely perfect. September came with a chill in the air, a promise of the winter to come. On the night of September 21st, exactly 1 year after Nathaniel Wolfe died in Sarah's yard, Ethan Cross stood on the porch of Hart Ridge and asked Sarah Blackfeather to marry him. Emma stood beside them wearing her best dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning. Sarah Blackfeather, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I cannot promise I will never fail you. I cannot promise life will be easy, but I can promise that I will stand beside you in every fight. I will protect Emma like she was my own blood, and I will honor Thomas's memory by being the kind of man who deserves what he built. Sarah looked at this man who had come into her life when she had nothing left but fear and desperation, who had fought for her, protected her, stayed when everyone else ran. Yes, she said simply, yes to all of it. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in Sheridan, with half the town attending. Rebecca cried through the entire service. Jeb and Lucas stood as witnesses. Benjamin Hart came all the way from Denver to officiate, having been given temporary authority by the territorial government. Emma stood between her mother and Ethan, holding both their hands, and when Hart asked who gave Sarah to be married, Emma spoke up in a clear, strong voice. My Papa Thomas gives her, and so do I. There was not a dry wee in the church. That night, the three of them returned to Hart Ridge together, not as a widow, a child, and a drifter, but as a family. Emma went to bed in her room, still wearing her flower crown. Sarah and Ethan stood on the porch, looking out at the land they would work together, the life they would build together. Are you happy? Ethan asked. I am not sure happy is the right word, Sarah said thoughtfully. I am content. I am safe. I am grateful. Those are better than happy. Thomas would approve? Thomas would have liked you very much. You are both men who understood that strength is not about dominance. It is about protection. They stood in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. The years that followed were good ones. Not easy. Ranching in Wyoming was never easy, but good. Emma grew into a confident young woman who could rope cattle, balance ledgers, and shoot the wings off a fly at 50 yards. She inherited Thomas's sense of justice and Sarah's strength, tempered with Ethan's patience. Sarah and Ethan had 2 more children, a son they named Daniel Edward, after both the sons they had lost, and 3 years later, a daughter they named Hope. Daniel grew up strong and thoughtful, learning the land from Ethan and the ways of his Apache heritage from Sarah. Hope was wild and fearless, climbing everything, afraid of nothing, the joy in their family. Emma loved both her younger siblings fiercely. She told them stories about Thomas Blackfeather, making sure they knew about the man who had started everything, who had believed in justice even when it cost him his life. In 1895, Sheriff Marcus Quinn retired. On his last day in office, he rode out to Hart Ridge to say goodbye. I wanted you to know, he told Sarah and Ethan, that I have spent every day of the last 8 years trying to be the man I should have been when you needed me. I do not know if I succeeded, but I tried. That is all any of us can do, Sarah said. Try, and keep trying. Quinn nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you for not hating me. Hate is too heavy to carry. I have learned to set down heavy things. As Quinn rode away, Ethan put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. You have become a wise woman. I have become a tired woman who has seen too much to waste energy on grudges. They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who had survived hell and come out whole on the other side. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Emma announced she was going to Denver to study law. She wanted to become an attorney, to fight for people like her parents, people who faced injustice and had nowhere to turn. Benjamin Hart said he would sponsor my education, she told them over dinner. He said the West needs lawyers who understand what real people face. Sarah felt pride and terror in equal measure, her daughter leaving the safety of the ranch, going out into a world that was still hard, still cruel to women, especially women with Apache blood. But she also remembered the frightened, silent child Emma had been. And she looked at the strong, brilliant woman she had become. Your father would be so proud of you, Sarah said. Both my fathers, Emma corrected, looking at Ethan. Ethan had to turn away so they would not see him cry. In 1903, as Emma was finishing law school, Sarah received a letter from the territorial government. It informed her that the land fraud investigation her testimony had sparked had finally concluded. Over 200,000 acres had been returned to rightful owners. 37 men had been imprisoned. And the precedent set by her case had changed how land law was enforced across the entire territory. You changed the world, Ethan said, reading over her shoulder. I tried to save my daughter. The world changed as a side effect. Is there a difference? Sarah thought about this. No, I suppose there is not. That summer, Emma returned home with her law degree and a job offer from the federal government. She would be working as a prosecutor, focusing on land fraud and civil rights cases. The night before she left to take the outlaws, she stood on the porch of Hart Ridge with her mother, watching the sun set over the land that 4 generations of black feathers would eventually work. Mama, do you ever wish things had been different? That Papa had never died? That you had never gone through all that pain? Sarah considered this carefully. I wish your father was still alive. I will always wish that. But I cannot wish away the pain, because the pain made me who I am. It made you who you are, and who we are is pretty good. You married Ethan. You have Daniel and Hope. Would you give them up to have Papa back? That is not a fair question. I know, but I think about it sometimes. Sarah pulled her daughter close. Life is not about the path we wish we had taken. It is about walking the path we are on with courage and grace. Your father gave me that wisdom, and I have tried to live by it. Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder. I love you, Mama, for being strong enough that I could learn to be strong too. I love you, little one. Go change the world. And Emma did. Over the next decades, Emma Blackfeather became one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the West. She won cases that others thought impossible. She stood up for the voiceless. She fought corruption at every level. And when people asked her where she learned to be so fearless, she always told them the same story. About a widow and a drifter who stood against an empire with nothing but courage and the belief that justice mattered. About a child who went silent with trauma but found her voice again. About a community that rallied around the weak instead of joining the strong. About Hart Ridge and the woman who refused to surrender. Sarah Blackfeather Cross lived to be 86 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep in the house Thomas had built and Ethan had repaired, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry her strength into a new century. At her funeral, Emma stood and spoke to the crowd that had come to pay respects. My mother was not a hero because she was perfect. She was a hero because she refused to quit. She lost the man she loved. She faced men who wanted to destroy her. She lived in a world that told her she did not matter because of her blood and her gender. And she looked at all of it and said no. Emma's voice was strong, no trace of the silent child she had once been. She said no to fear, no to injustice, no to the lie that some people are worth more than others. And in saying no, she taught all of us how to stand up, how to fight, how to survive, and then do more than survive, how to live. After the service, as they laid Sarah to rest beside Thomas on the ridge overlooking the ranch, Ethan stood with his children and grandchildren, looking out at 200 acres of legacy. Tell me about her, little Hope's daughter asked. She had been named Sarah, and she had her great-grandmother's eyes. Tell me about the woman I am named for. Ethan knelt down, his 92-year-old body protesting but still strong. Your great-grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew. Not because she was not afraid, but because she was terrified and did what needed to be done anyway. What did she do? She survived, and then she lived. And that, little one, is the hardest thing any of us ever do. The child nodded solemnly, not fully understanding, but sensing this was important. As the sun set over Hart Ridge on that autumn day in 1946, Ethan Cross stood alone at Sarah's grave. Emma and the others had returned to the house, but he needed a moment, just one more moment, with the woman who had saved his life by letting him save hers. Thank you, he whispered to the earth that held her. Thank you for Emma. for Daniel and Hope, for 43 years of waking up with purpose, for teaching me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone help carry the load. The wind moved through the grass, sounding almost like a voice, almost like laughter. "I will see you again," Ethan said, "when it is my time, and I will tell you all about how your grandchildren are changing the world, about how Emma won that impossible case in Denver, about how Daniel expanded the ranch to 3,000 acres, about how Hope became a teacher who changed 100 lives." He smiled through his tears. "I will tell you that everything you fought for, everything you built, it endured, it mattered, you mattered." Ethan Cross lived another 8 years. He died at 100, still sharp-minded, still strong-willed, surrounded by a family that loved him. His last words were reported to be, "Tell Sarah I kept my promise. I stayed." Hartridge Ranch continued for another 7 generations, each one telling the story of Sarah Blackfeather, the woman who stood against an empire, the woman who survived fire and bullets and loss, the woman who taught them all that strength is not about never falling down. It is about standing back up. And that legacy, built on ashes and blood and unbreakable will, became the foundation for a family that would touch thousands of lives over the next century. Because in the end, that is what heroes do. They do not just save themselves, they save everyone who comes after. And Sarah Blackfeather, Apache widow turned matriarch, frightened woman turned warrior, victim turned victor, had saved them all. Her roots, planted in the ashes of Hart Ridge, grew deep and strong and eternal. And they would never be moved again.